A second Trump administration is promising to be much more authoritarian than the first one. That is why it is more important now than ever to put up as many guardrails as possible before he takes office. But first, if you end up getting anything out of this video, please do remember to hit that subscribe button. I am trying to reach 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year, and I would very much appreciate your support. Now, I'm sure many of you know that Donald Trump has never actually been a fan of our free press. In fact, he's probably been one of the most hostile figures towards our media in modern American history. Donald Trump is only interested in having media around if they are singing his praises. He's not interested in having journalists who peek under the hood and discover all of the corruption that is a Trump administration. And that is probably why we have had such a long history of Donald Trump making actual threats towards journalists.
It's frankly disgusting the way the press is able to write whatever they want to write, and people should look into it.
You take the writer, because you're never going to find it. They're going through phone records. It's been a long time. You take the writer and or the publisher of the paper, a certain paper, and you say, who is the leaker? National Security. And they say, we're not going to tell you. They say, it's okay, you're going to jail. And when this person realizes that he is going to be the bride of another prisoner very shortly, he will say, I'd very much like to tell you exactly who that leaker is. It was Bill Jones.
They're the enemy of the people. They are. They're the enemy of the... I've been asked not to say it. I don't want to say it. They're the enemy of the people. And someday they're not going to be the enemy of the people, I hope.
So in case you missed what he was saying there, he's basically threatening journalists with jail time if they do not reveal the sources of leaked material. This is something that Donald Trump has done in the past. He has threatened to go after anybody or any journalist who might have leaked information from a Trump administration. This is what people are talking about when they say Donald Trump has fascistic tendencies. These are the types of things that fascists do. Go after journalists in the media if they are telling stories that might go against dear leader. That is why it is so important that we establish guardrails for our democracy and our journalists before Trump comes into office. And that is exactly what the Press Act would do. It would give some protections on a federal level for our journalists.
The Press Act, of course, is all about filling in a major gap in protecting journalists. It would block the FBI and other agencies from using subpoenas to figure out who leaked information by going after reporters, their internet providers, or even any services they may have used. Basically, it would help journalists protect their sources without the fear of being thrown in jail for simply doing their job.
This should be a non-controversial bill. We do not want our president being able to go after journalists just because they might leak information to the American public. We can all agree that sometimes leaked information is the only way for the American public to be informed on something. And we can all agree that we do not want the president to be able to punish that type of reporting. I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. I don't want Biden going after journalists, and I don't want Trump going after journalists. It's just now Donald Trump poses the greatest threat to some of these protections, to some of these norms that make our democracy a functioning one. And until recently, the people in Congress agreed with me. This bill actually passed the House unanimously, which is saying something in such a polarized America.
This bipartisan bill already passed the House unanimously this year. Many of Trump's allies in Congress support the bill, and at one point, even Tucker Carlson actually endorsed it in an interview. This was one of a few things many Republicans and Democrats were on the same page about: protecting the First Amendment and stopping government overreach when it came to journalism.
This is something we should be on the same page about. Even if you are a Trump supporter, we should all agree that it's not good for presidents of the United States to go after journalists or news agencies just because they don't like some of their reporting. And that's exactly what Donald Trump has been threatening to do. He wants to go after his political opponents. He wants to go after mainstream media. He's talked about shutting down 60 Minutes because he didn't like an interview that they edited of Kamala Harris. I mean, these are authoritarian type tendencies that people are talking about. This is why people call Donald Trump a fascist, because these are the things that fascists do. We should be protecting our press. We should be protecting journalists, even if that information comes from a leak inside a administration. It only makes sense to put these guardrails in place, not only because Donald Trump is such a threat to our democracy and to our norms and our way of life here in America, but because these are the types of laws that should have been on the book already. These are the types of protections that should have already been established and enshrined into law. Let's listen to Jody Ginsburg, a press advocate, talk about the importance of getting this bill passed.
So your organization and others have raised concerns about what Trump's second term could mean for press freedoms. What are your specific worries, and what have you seen already that gives you pause?
I think we need to think about two things specifically about a new Trump administration. The first is around legal threats, and the second is around regulation. There are many others that we can talk about, but those are the ones I think we really need to be alive to in the second administration. Already in the days leading up to the election, Trump issued a host of legal threats against organizations like the New York Times, CBS, and others. We might expect to see more of that in the new Trump administration. Personal legal cases. He's suing, I think, the New York Times and CBS for $10 billion each. Personal legal threats, but also potentially challenges to pieces of legislation that have for decades protected the press against vexatious lawsuits, like the Supreme Court case Sullivan versus New York Times, which allows the press to publish public interest information and be protected from being sued for defamation.
These are the types of protections that we should be granting to our press, to our news outlets, to our journalists. That doesn't mean that a news agency is not going to be held liable for defamation if they knowingly lie about something, like Fox News was. They were forced to pay $787 million because they knowingly spread lies about the 2020 election being stolen. So there is a balance here. We want to make sure that our journalists and our news agencies can report on important information coming out of governmental administrations. We want to make sure that we protect leaked material, because sometimes that is the only way that the American public gets to know about a thing. And this is important work that journalists do. That is exactly why we have to protect these types of things in our law, especially on the federal level, because Donald Trump is now telling Republicans to kill this bill. How does this make any sense? Donald Trump says Republicans must kill this bill. This is the guy who told us that he was the free speech candidate. This is the guy that said free speech is more important than anything. This is the guy who promised to follow the Constitution. So why would he want this bill killed? Unless he was going to try to follow through on some of those fascistic tendencies that he has been teasing all year. He wants to go after his political enemies, and I'm sure the mainstream media is on the top of his list. Why would we not enshrine these types of protections into our law on a federal level when Donald Trump has made these types of threats? Unless you are an unprincipled person who just wants to see liberals suffer. Grow a backbone, call your senator, tell them to pass this bill, tell them to take it up in the Senate and get this passed before Donald Trump comes into office. Because Donald Trump is now speaking out against this bill, people don't want to cross Dear Leader.
Trump's outburst Wednesday may have trashed all the bipartisan work done to prevent this kind of overreach, even though the House-backed Press Act is now looking unlikely to make it through the Senate before the session ends. It only takes one senator wasting time on the floor to push this off until next year, when we know what happens. Republicans take control of Congress.
So even though this was a bill that passed unanimously through the House, Donald Trump still wants this bill killed. Even though most of the American people probably agree with the passage of this bill, Donald Trump wants to see it killed. And why? Because, of course, he wants to carry through on some of his threats. He wants to go after his political opponents, his political perceived enemies. He wants to go after the mainstream media. He wants to shut down the New York Times or CBS or whatever. This is what Donald Trump has been running on, and he's making sure that he has the tools in place to follow through on these threats. When he said that his second administration was going to be his revenge and retribution, and people told us, oh, you're just being hyperbolic, he's not going to do that. This is exactly what we're talking about. There is no other reason not to pass this bill unless Donald Trump wanted to use this avenue of attack to go after his perceived enemies. So everybody should be calling up their senator, telling him to take up this bill, protect some of our main tenets of democracy that are important for a functioning country. Tell them to take up the Press Act and pass that thing before Donald Trump comes back into office. Or else, Donald Trump is likely to use this as an avenue of attack when he's going after his political opponents. I'll leave it there for now. If you guys got anything out of this video, please do remember to hit that subscribe button. Maybe share it with a friend or two. I'd very much appreciate that. Like I said, I am trying to reach 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year, and I would very much appreciate your support. If you want to see how elected Republicans are trying to pass a bill that would give Donald Trump broad-ranging authority to shut down nonprofits he doesn't like, go ahead and watch that video on the screen now. Otherwise, I'll see you guys on the next one.